talk a lot about food waste on this show, how big it is, how it shows up in our homes, our grocery stores, and landfills. But what if the real opportunity to solve food waste isn't in how we shop or cook, but in how our food is packaged? This week, I sat down with Mina Mekhail. He's the founder and CEO of Freshr, a biotech company that figured out how to make food last longer without adding anything to it. Instead, they embed antimicrobial technology directly into the packaging film, slowing that bacterial growth down, extending shelf life, and unlocking massive gains for both the planet and the bottom line.
So essentially the way it happens is once we chemically bind, so when I say chemically bind, think of it as anchoring those naturally derived ingredients on the surface of the film. So it doesn't move into the food, like they're kind of fixed on the surface.
Welcome to The Capitalist Hippie, the podcast where we challenge the old rules of business to build something better. I'm Marco Pimentel, marketing expert, entrepreneur, and lover of bold, sustainable ideas. Every week, we dive into data-backed insights, groundbreaking ideas, and real-world strategies that help you outthink and outmaneuver the status quo.
I remember having a cold call with a director, and he said to me, "Where do we buy this from?" I remember laughing in my head and saying, "We don't even have a product yet. I'm just trying to validate the idea. We have nothing yet."
From coating strawberries in his condo fridge to partnering with one of the world's largest salmon producers, Mina's story is a masterclass in how deep science, real market listening, and climate urgency can collide into something powerful. Let's get into it. So we have a massive food waste problem. We've had quite a few guests on the show talking about food waste and all the kind of opportunities that we have to fix food waste. And Mina, I'm super excited to have you join talking about Freshr's solution. It's a really kind of an innovative solution. It's a new technology that you're building in a space that right now I think it's, we need both the technology solutions, we need the logistics solutions for food waste, we need to cook less, save more. There's a whole host of things that we need to do, but why food waste? And have you always been thinking about, food waste and climate change and impact? And how did you get to this idea of preserving foods?
Oh, thanks, Marco, for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a good question. So if you look at my background, I'm an engineer by training. I did my undergrad here at Dalhousie, went on to do a master's and then a PhD actually in biomedical engineering, which could seem a bit far away from what I am doing now, but it isn't. I'll now in a second. Did a PhD in biomedical and specializing in biomaterials. So biomaterials is essentially the use of either biologically derived materials to solve biological issues or to use materials in general to solve biological issues. So that was my PhD out of McGill. Went on to work for a few years and then started the company. I'd say that food waste has always been a personal, not passion, but I should say a concern for me. I hate food waste. I've always been passionate about fighting food waste in whatever capacity I can. Growing up, this was something that was kind of hammered into our heads. Don't waste any food. And I do see food insecurity all around. I grew up also in the Middle East where, specifically in Egypt, where, you would see a lot of people with a lot of food insecurity. So I kind of grew up with this, putting a lot of value on food and not wasting it. So essentially after I finished my PhD, I worked, like I said, for a few years. Then I decided to start a company. I've always wanted to start a company. This was something always on my radar. And I actually started a tutoring company during my PhD. So I always had the entrepreneurial bug, if you will. So then I decided to work on something that I can have a big impact in and also something that I'm passionate about. After a lot of thinking, I came to the idea of, okay, how can we use biomaterials, which again was the kind of the main focus I did in my PhD. How can I use biomaterials in fighting food waste? The idea started very broadly, and I went through a District 3 in Montreal, which is an incubator, and they did what's called a business model validation. So I took my initial idea, which was, how about we spray fresh fruits and vegetables with this naturally derived coating in order to extend shelf life and reduce the waste? There's a company called Appeal Sciences out of Silicon Valley that does this. So I wasn't very far off. Like it wasn't a crazy idea. I was like, okay, there's a $1 billion company doing this. I could probably do it cheaper, better. But essentially, after doing a lot of interviews, we did what's called the customer discovery program. I decided to shift away from fresh produce. Simply because if I was a startup starting developing a new technology, if it was not really cheap, which is what's needed for the produce because it's a low value commodity, then it was not going to be feasible. It was going to be very hard to scale up. So essentially, I decided to start with a high value commodity, and then that's my first pivot was away from produce into seafood, because per pound seafood is more expensive, of course, and specifically starting with salmon, given that it's the highest selling by volume. So while I'm very much focused on targeting food waste, but my vision for the next 6 7 years is very narrow in the sense that we want to start with salmon and then we want to expand from there into other proteins and eventually even go back and start targeting produce.
If you're building a solution with massive potential, like solving food waste at scale, it's tempting to take on too much too soon. But Mina made a smart move here, starting with salmon, a high-value product where small gains matter. For other founders, the takeaway is this: start with a wedge, a part of the problem where your solution is most valuable, most urgent, and most profitable. That's your launchpad. That's such an interesting kind of distinction between the low value commodities of fruits and vegetables and salmon and fish. And I guess also salmon's worth so much money, and commercially, how do you extend the life of that? But is it also just that it seems like, I feel like fish just doesn't last as long in general, where like I think like an apple obviously will last a long time, maybe bananas a little bit less so, but fish just seems like something that, it doesn't last as long.
Exactly. And it's a very different problem. When you think about it, I'm not going to go too much into the science, but the problem with essentially waste from a produce perspective, either they look ugly, so like retailers are not putting them out and they're actually wasting them, or they essentially ripen and they just waste, they spoil. And so the question with produce is a problem of ripening. So a lot of what Appeal does is slow down the ripening process, right? So the problem with fresh proteins, like fresh meats in general, is that it's bacterial spoilage. That's the problem, right? Bacteria is the
Mm.
one is the entity that is driving the spoilage. So what we care about the most here is to have some sort of an antimicrobial technology, essentially, that can slow down the proliferation of this bacteria on the food in order to extend shelf life and reduce spoilage. So even from a technical perspective, it's a very different solution, a very different technology that is needed for both.
But the idea for this, so you when you went to school, you were in this type of realm when you were doing your master's. When you went to the incubator to kind of get this validation on the business model and kind of decided, we're not going to go with this spray route. We're not going to go after produce. We're going to go after, meats and specifically around seafood. Where did you start? Was this already kind of a thing in a lab? Did you get some funding from this incubator and you start building it there? Like this seems like something that is more scientific, more lab derived, and then tested and then brought into kind of commercial application. Like how did that process go for you?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. No, it actually was all developed in-house in the company. So one of the things that the incubators did for us is after so there was a cohort of companies that went through the business model validation. And after that, the incubator essentially took on a few companies that were fully incubated, and that includes having some lab space. So our beginnings were very humble. Like I can even tell you, while before I even went through this program, the incubation program, I was living in a condo in Montreal, my wife and I, and I set up this table in the middle of the living room where I was just like randomly coating like strawberries with all kinds of concoctions that I had, dreamt up. And I was trying to putting them in the fridge and confusing the heck out of my wife. She's like, what is all this random stuff in the fridge? But yeah, so, it started like that. And eventually, once we got into the incubator, we had some lab space. One of the biggest things for me was I need to develop this entire technology in the company. All IP, I wanted it all to be owned by the company. This was something that I'm personally convinced by. We didn't license any technology from third parties. I had the technical knowledge, and I obviously hired people who also are technically competent that were able to start developing this in the lab. And we started literally with one microbiologist. I remember it was just like one person working for me in a lab, trying to develop the version 1.0 of this technology. And we went through. Now we have our own dedicated lab space, production line. Like we've expanded quite a bit since then, but yeah, that's it. Started in a very humble beginning, and I was very keen on developing all IP in house.
This is a strategic move that a lot of science-based startups overlook. By developing the technology and owning the IP in-house, Freshr didn't just create a product, they created leverage. It's what made licensing deals with global players possible. If your innovation is core to your business, don't outsource it, own it. Who were you talking to? Were you talking to the grocery stores? Were you talking to the large seafood processing plants? Like, how did you had this idea for this technology? You're going to build a lab. You're testing in your house. Strawberries. You're doing all these type of things, but did you have like some inside knowledge? Did you have some inside conversations to say like this market needs this, they'd be willing to take this, or we're going to bring to market something that they already buy and it's just a better option? Like, I guess what was the motivation from like the market to say you should be building this?
That's exactly what we did at the business model validation program at the incubator. Essentially, the program follows Steve Blank's customer discovery process. What that means is you get out of the office and you talk to as many people as you can from industry to validate whether there's a product market fit. So actually, what we did was before I went on to develop any technology, besides the time at the condo when I was just like coating these random strawberries, besides that, but when it actually came to seriously develop a product, before I did that, I had to validate that there's a product market fit. And this is when we pivoted a couple of times. So I went out essentially and I started talking to people. I used my network. So my first contacts were people that I knew who had some contacts in the food industry. I said, hey, do you know someone who's, produce farmer? Talk to farmers. Obviously, they like the idea, but the first question comes out of their mouth is how much does this cost? At the end of the day, it has to be really cheap. So after talking to a bunch of people in farming and ag, I decided to move into seafood. And when I started to talking to people in seafood, there were other questions, right? So the questions were, how do we apply this? Is this part of the packaging? Is this something I spray on my fish? How much does it cost still? All of these questions. So I essentially went out and started talking to, if I remember correctly, I spoke to 85 people in the supply chain, anywhere from retailers. I talked to, I don't want to mention names, but I talked to a whole bunch of retailers. I talked to fish processors. I talked to even aquaculture organizations, different aquaculture organizations. I talked to everyone.
This is a reminder that great tech isn't enough. Mina spent months talking to farmers, retailers, and processors before developing the product. And the feedback he got directly shaped Freshr's direction. If you're building something complex, especially in climate or biotech, customer discovery isn't just a checkbox. It's how you avoid building the wrong thing.
The idea was to get a sense of what exactly, to your point, what is needed. Am I developing something that is needed, or am I just, wasting my time developing something and then trying to fit it somewhere in the market? And, that's something that is done you're not trained to do that as a PhD academic. You're not trained to do that. You're trained to just go ahead and develop the technology, right? And I took a step back and I said, I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to validate first and then go ahead and develop. So essentially, I can tell you a few key conversations that were kind of milestones for me. So, my first idea again, spray on produce, I pivoted away from that. The second thing was, the next natural progression is spray on seafood. Then I remember talking to a bunch of people from retail, and they said, look, if you're spraying seafood, you're going to put it on the food label. If I'm going to buy a fresh piece of salmon and I see that, it contains ingredients X, Y, Z, even if you're telling me it's all natural, it's going to have a negative customer perception. So, and it was not just one retailer that mentioned this, multiple of them. So I took a step back and I said, well, okay, so that's a problem. So how do we solve that? So I, went back, thought about it. I said, well, what if we incorporate, what if we immobilize this coating on the film or on the packaging material, and so it does not go into the food. Only when the material is in contact with the fish that is it extends shelf life. If it's not in contact, nothing is in the food. And I remember, so this is very clear, one of the biggest fish processors in the world. I remember having a cold call with one of them, with a director, and he said to me, "That's very interesting. Where do we buy this from? You know, uh, are you guys manufacturing this? Can we buy it?" And I remember like laughing in my head and saying, "We don't even have a product yet. I'm just trying to validate the idea. We have nothing yet." But that happened actually two, three times with different salmon processors. All of them got very excited about the idea. They said, "Okay, well, so this doesn't go on the food label. It will extend the shelf life, give us the benefit. And once the packaging is removed, this is removed." And they got excited about that. So once I hit that, I knew there was okay, this seems like a product market fit. Multiple people validating this, and also, I should say, one of the major three retailers here in Canada also validated the same thing. So I said, okay, so I've hit something here that there's a need, and the way I'm approaching it seems like it fits what the market is looking for. And then we went ahead to develop our coating that is applied on the film and is chemically immobilized on the film so it doesn't migrate into the food. And that obviously took a few years to develop.
Here's a lesson worth repeating. The market always pushes back. In Mina's case, it was the requirement that any coating on the food had to be listed on the label, which could turn off the customers. Instead of trying to fight it, he reimagined the product. And that's the play. Let real-world constraints become your design brief. That's how great products get shaped. For people who obviously aren't familiar with what Freshr's packaging is, maybe kind of a high-level example of what's it made of and how does it actually help preserve food longer, specifically in salmon that you're working with.
So essentially what we do is we bring together a few naturally derived ingredients that we've obviously done a lot of work to identify. We bring them together in this very unique way to create certain structures. And then we take those, you can call them like microparticles, if you will, and we apply them, we chemically bind them on the surface of the food packaging film. So we've worked with multiple substrates. When I say substrate, I mean the actual film. So we've added those microgels on compostable film, post-consumer recycled film, recyclable film, regular polyethylene film, polypropylene, PET. We've tried a whole array of packaging, and we've been successful in incorporating the coating. So essentially, the way it happens is once we chemically bind. So when I say chemically bind, think of it as anchoring those naturally derived ingredients on the surface of the film, so it doesn't move into the food. Like they're kind of fixed on the surface. And essentially, when the coated side of the film, which is the food-facing side, gets in contact with the salmon, it gets in contact with the bacteria on the surface of the salmon. And most bacteria, let's say in salmon or in any other seafood, is on the surface. That is because when it's filleted and handled, so a lot of the bacteria are on the surface of the salmon. So when the bacteria gets in contact with that coated surface, it doesn't grow as fast as it normally would. So our coating slows down the growth of the bacteria. So it takes it into slow motion, essentially. So the bacteria that would have spoiled the salmon, typically in 14 days from harvest to consumption, that's the shelf life of salmon. If the cold chain is maintained, it's around 14 days. With ours, we can extend an extra 2 to 4 days to that, just by slowing down the growth of bacteria on the surface.
Which is kind of the most important part, isn't it? Because of like at that point in that later stage is kind of when it's kind of finally sold, typically now in a fridge for somebody to use or in a commercial setting to use. So I'm assuming is those the last days or the extra days are really kind of the important ones.
Correct. And we have different products to target different parts of the supply chain. So this is also very important for us companies to understand how the supply chain works, right? So So one of the things, if we package the salmon, like you said, especially the last few days, are when it's sitting at the counter at the retailer, right? So it's waiting to be sold, right? So that's definitely where a big advantage of our technology is. Another advantage actually is when salmon fillets are shipped in bulk. Usually, the way it's done currently in industry is that the fillets are placed in what's called sleeve bags, or with a piece of film between the different fillets, and for handling, obviously, so they don't stick to each other. And then they're stacked on top of each other, put in a box, and shipped all over the world. So essentially, our technology could be that, could be the coated film between the fish fillets as they're being shipped. So essentially, the time you gain there is the time of travel. So let's say if I'm a processor that is, I've been exporting to Europe because I can't go further than that because of the shelf life issue. Now I have those extra days. I can start shipping to China, right? I can open markets in new geographies that I wasn't able to reach because I've added those extra days in bulk shipping, travel time. Yeah. So these are the two main formats essentially where we apply the product.
And how does so? I guess from a a film perspective, and let's just use an example of like the plastic wrap that you do see. Most people would probably associate with salmon in their mind is a plastic wrap piece of salmon fillet that they see in a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
How does your coating go on that plastic wrap? Do you wholesale in that wrap, coat it, and then resell the wrap, or do you work with the wrap manufacturers? Like, where do you place yourself, I guess, in that supply chain there?
Right. Yeah, so we work with film extruders who extrude the film, and we essentially built, just as a step number one for us as a company, that is highly innovative and still in the kind of scale up phase. We built our pilot production line, which essentially is a line that takes a roll of film, it unwinds it, and it coats it, and it winds it back up again. That is the final product that then goes to the processor, who puts it on his packaging line, that then goes ahead and packages the salmon. That is the format right now. But looking forward into the future, we look to work with film manufacturers, so extruders slash converters, essentially film extruders who are, just extruding the film. Converters are, they could be the same company. They essentially take the film and do all the post extrusion stuff on it, either print on it or laminate it, or do any other process on it. So we want to work with film extruders slash converters to do the coating at their facilities. So we want to essentially subcontract out manufacturing to multiple players in different geographies so that they can feed into their local geographies. And that does many things for us. It offloads that cost of manufacturing and having to do everything in-house. It allows us to not put all our eggs in one basket by spreading out our manufacturing to multiple film manufacturers. Also is more sustainable, right? So if I'm working with a film manufacturer in the Midwest in the States who is supplying that region, I don't have to be shipping coated film from Halifax all the way there, right? So it cuts down on travel time, and it cuts down on GHG emissions. So that is the model we're working towards. But as of now, we're doing the coating in-house.
In-house. And who kind of pays for this when it comes to like, or is there, I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, does it cost a little bit more money to have this coating comparatively if you were to buy a roll of Freshr's packaging versus a normal film packaging? And obviously there's a benefit down at some point in the supply chain that this is extending the fish. But who ultimately is really excited about that extension? Is it the people that are processing the fish? Is it the grocery stores or the cold storage? Like who really kind of is like happy to pay for this solution in that kind of model?
We have multiple customer segments. Maybe I should step back and explain the first customer segment are the fish processors. So these are the ones that are doing the packaging and selling the packaged salmon to the retailers, right? So they are paying for the roll. So they're paying that premium. And yes, there is a premium for sure. They're paying that premium to get the coated film that would extend the shelf life. If they're packaging and selling to retailer, they're essentially selling this product as a value add product to the retailer, right? Because it's going to the retailer not as your regular commodity salmon commodity. It's going to the retailer as a sustainable packaging that also extends shelf life and will allow the retailer to sell more and waste less. So essentially, the person that cost gets passed down from the cost of Freshr coating, if you will, gets passed down from the processor to the retailer.
Yeah.
Um, the unit economics of that, we have done it, right? So we've said, look, if you're paying an extra percent, this much percent on the coated film, but you're extending the shelf life of a commodity that is 13.99 a pound. So at day four at the retailer, instead of throwing it in the garbage, it's still at its full price. And at day five, it's still at its full price. And day six, and by day
Yeah.
nine, then you can put it on half off, and then you can, if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. But essentially that time, when you look at the unit economics, it makes a lot of sense to the retailers, to absorb that cost. So the retailers also have the option to pass down the extra cost to the consumer. And this is something we've also kind of modeled. And ultimately, if you're buying a piece of salmon, you're buying a high value commodity. So if I increase this packaging by, 20, 30 cents, you're not going to even notice that price increase given the functionality of extending shelf life as a consumer. Um, so yes, the processor is paying for it, passing it down to retailer, passing it down to end consumer. That's one route. The other route is I will give there's multiple scenarios where that becomes an interesting conversation, but I'll just use one more example. So let's say if I'm a processor and I am currently flying out my salmon from East Coast to West Coast because I'm selling it to the food service industry on the West Coast, and I don't want to, I don't have much time.
Yeah.
So now that there's time, you can essentially use continuous trucking instead of having to fly it over. So that does multiple things. It cuts down on your travel cost, right? On your transportation cost, and that has a lot of value. So the added value of using Fresher tech, Fresher pack technology, as opposed to how much you save. So there's clearly a delta there. There's a benefit of using Fresher tech and using continuous trucking as opposed to flying, because flying is very expensive.
Yeah.
So that's one other way of showing the value, and the processor willing to absorb that cost of fresher coating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are just two examples. There's multiple other scenarios, where you think we have a product that we can target the retailers directly, essentially because if you look at where packaging of fish takes place in the supply chain, some of it is branded and packaged by the processors. Some of it is packaged at the store level and is not branded. It's
Yeah.
when you walk into your Sobeys superstore, that there's no brand on that, right? So that's a different product that is in store packaged. So we are looking to also provide retailers with a solution for that. Essentially, a vacuum bag that can be applied at the store level with just using a normal vacuum pack machine, which are very cheap. Um,
Yeah.
so there, the retailer would absorb the cost and pass that down to the consumer. Again, the unit economics make sense because it's sitting on the shelf longer and providing that opportunity to being sold quicker.
This is the business case for climate tech in one example. The packaging costs more, but if it keeps high value salmon fresh for a few extra days, the retailer avoids markdowns and sells more at full price. For founders, your climate solution has to create economic value first. That's what drives adoption, not just sustainability messaging. I didn't even realize and think about the branding aspect of this too, from a retailer's perspective, to be able to, have this on that packaging to be able to help sell. That makes, a ton of sense. And obviously when you're dealing with food and you're dealing with commodities, time is pretty much one of the main factors in terms
Absolutely.
of the value of that commodity. So there seems like a lot. So when I think about technology solutions, especially when you're obviously dealing with something in the food space, how do you go to market with this? Is it, do you need FDA approval first? Do you do trials? Do you get, or do you start selling right away and customers kind of lined up and kind of slowly ramp? Like how did you take it to market from there?
Well, there's three things you can look at: production, regulatory, and commercialization. So from the production, first thing is obviously we have a line. Still a pilot production line. If we want to, obviously, we need to be able to produce to meet the demand, right? So the next thing we're doing now is, after commissioning the current line that we have, we're going to be building a larger line, a coating line, to produce essentially more coated film. From the regulatory perspective, which is critical, we need we need Health Canada approval in Canada. So this is something we're very close to doing right now. Essentially, what it is Health Canada looks at the ingredients that you're using on the film. It requires a bunch of testing. So if I'm saying, I'm trying to make sure that nothing is moving into the food, or very little is actually of what I'm coating on the film is moving into the food, they want to see data to support that. So they want to see what's called migration data, essentially migration from the film into the food. There's also FDA follows similar things. So we're doing our regulatory FDA as well as Health Canada at the moment. The next step is we're going to move to other jurisdictions, which we're very interested in, like Japan and the EU. So yes, we do need some regulatory approvals on the coating. So from a production side, we need to meet the demand. From a regulatory side, we do need those approvals, and finally, from a commercialization side, we need to pilot, and we've been piloting with many companies. Some of them I can mention, some of them I cannot because it's under NDA. But one of the ones that is out there in the public is Mitsubishi Chemical Corp in Japan. They're essentially a film manufacturer. They're looking to license our technology, uh, to coat their film, their proprietary film, and sell it to their customers in Southeast Asia. So we've been piloting with them for quite a while now and very successfully. Um, and we're going to be releasing some news about this in the near future, so stay tuned. There's going to be two press releases coming out with different aspects with regards to this partnership, but it's been going very, very well. We've also piloted with one of the biggest, I would say, the top five producers of salmon in the world, and very successfully as well. And we've tested multiple products. The one that I mentioned about bulk shipping, as well as the skin packaging, which is the one that is packaged and branded. Yeah, so these three things are always important for us. Make sure that we're doing the pilots to get big corporations excited about this. Make sure we have the production capacity to meet the demand and get all the regulatory approvals needed to be able to sell freely.
Yeah. And obviously, this is the market for salmon specifically, and then fish more broadly is absolutely massive. And I
Yes.
think the growth numbers for seafood is continuing to increase. And obviously, as we have get to 10 billion people on our planet, fish is a very important aspect. Does this at some point down the line, is there applicability, broadly speaking, across kind of all meats as well, from beef to pork to
Mm,
chicken as well?
absolutely. We've actually already tested with beef. Like we've already demonstrated that the technology works for beef quite well. We essentially started with the highest value and working our way down, right? So the highest value seafood. So we started with salmon. We've tested lobster, processed lobster. We've tested shrimp, and then we moved. We haven't tried like white fleshed fish yet, like the cod and the haddock and so forth. But we did a lot of work with shrimp, lobster, and obviously the most work was done on salmon. And we moved down to beef, and we've demonstrated that it works pretty well. And now the next thing on our list will be poultry and then pork at the end, given the lowest value.
You've raised some funding most recently in February of this year. The
Hmm.
amount was, what was the amount again?
It's undisclosed.
Undisclosed.
Yeah, it's not.
That's
We're,
how.
we're
That's why I couldn't find it. I was like, how
well.
do I
It's
not know that number?
no. So the press release is coming out very soon about this funding. It won't mention the amount, but it will mention the investors that came on board, and they're all pretty heavy hitters. So we're very excited about this. We're very excited about this. The trust they have in our company and supporting our company growth.
And I was going to ask with it is what's, obviously you got this round. Obviously, you're at this point right now where kind of the worlds are colliding between your approvals and production and commercialization. What's the funding for? And, where do you kind of want to be in the next kind of 3 years as you take this really to market?
So the funding was essentially to essentially the three things that I mentioned, commercialization, regulatory, production. Essentially get the production up and running and to be able to meet the demand that we're going to be facing in the next few years. So we already have a pilot production line. We're commissioning that right now. The idea is to also be able to build a large scale manufacturing line with one of our partners, with one of our film manufacturing partners. The second thing is essentially to we already have a pipeline of customers, but we want to start like feeding into that funnel a little bit more in the sales funnel, right? So we already have, I would say, four major partnerships with major companies. The idea is to start going to Europe and expanding on that. And obviously, the States was on our radar, before this whole tariffs thing started. But probably because of the current tariff situation, we're going to be putting more of our energy and resources in on Europe. Europe is one of the biggest producers of salmon, but also one of the biggest consumers of seafood in
Yeah.
general, right? So there's definitely a lot of opportunity there, and we're very excited about it. Japan is also, through our collaboration with Mitsubishi Chemical Corp. Um, so the idea is start, bringing in customers. We already have, four major ones. We want to by within 3 years, we want to have a good cohort of customers, somewhere in the range of 10 to 12 big corporations. Again, we're dealing with some very big corporations. We're B2B, right? So, if you capture, the second biggest producer of salmon in the world, that's, a big chunk of the market, right? So we want to be able to expand our market, our consumer base at the moment. So the funding is going to go towards people hiring and refining strategy around commercialization and having business development, boots on the ground in Europe as well as the US to start getting some of those partnerships going. And essentially, the last thing is to get all the regulatory approvals to getting the product into the market. So I would say, it's hitting on all the three things that I mentioned: production, regulatory, and commercialization.
You're an entrepreneur and founder in a food waste space. Broadly speaking, obviously, you're working in technology. You're building a new technology, and what I love about it is that, from a business standpoint, why if it extends the shelf life and allows you to sell more and waste less, it's just it's kind of that perfect example. I think when we think about climate businesses or businesses that are trying to do things that are better for our planet, but it's such an easy solution. It's not a solution that requires massive change for people. It's a solution that kind of works, which is really great. But just broadly speaking, food waste, like, do you think it's going to be solved through through technology? Do you think that there's other things that entrepreneurs should be thinking about when we're thinking about food waste?
Yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet here. I think there's a bunch of things that have to work together. And I think you mentioned some of those things in the introduction to this episode. We have to tackle food waste from multiple areas or foci. So essentially, what we need to do is, from a logistics point of view, the supply chain needs to be improved in distribution of food. The way that we produce food has to be done in a sustainable way. The everything from farm to fork has to be thought of. And there are many companies out there, like you said, and I know a whole bunch that are tackling food waste and using completely different technologies. I think technology will solve part of the problem, but I think also customer education is a big one, because one of the statistics that kind of scared me is that in North America, 75% of the food waste happened at the consumer level.
Yeah.
So that essentially tells me something. That tells me that we're wasting a lot in North America. Like, and if you compare that to the rest of the world, that's not the case at all. The numbers are much lower. Obviously, in Europe, it's lower. In Asia, it's much lower. But apparently, in North America, it's quite large. 75% is wasted at the consumer level. So what is needed there? Like, what's needed there is customer education, and what's needed there are solutions at the customer level in order to either encourage and customers to essentially buy less, buy only what's needed, um, manage food better at a home level. And this is something I struggle with. Like, I have two kids, like under 6, and it's crazy for us because you give them food, you don't know how much they're gonna eat. They eat half of it and they don't want to eat the rest. Like, it's all these small things. It
Yeah.
adds up, it adds up. You buy a piece of salmon, you stick it in the fridge, you say, "Oh, I'll cook this tomorrow." You get busy tomorrow. The day after that, you smell it, it smells bad. You chuck it. The milk, you smell the milk, and that opens up a whole can of worms. I don't want to digress too much, but, like, again, the best before date is also like one of those things that we need to rethink.
Yeah.
It's only a suggestion, the best before. It's not like it spoils on that day, like, you have to also use organoleptic, just smell it, taste it, see if it's okay. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that I think we need to work on. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think we're doing our part to have an impact. Obviously, we're very passionate. It's in our purpose statement that our target as a company is always going to be food waste. So our purpose statement is one of those things that never changes, regardless of whatever product we're developing in 20 years from now. It's going to be the same. We are innovating a zero food waste future using advanced materials. So it says we're an innovation company. So we're not going to do anything that is not innovation based. We're always going to be tackling food waste, and we're always going to be using advanced materials to do so, as opposed to creating apps or that's for other companies to do. So yeah, I think it takes a village, like it takes a whole bunch of companies to tackle the food waste. I don't think there's a silver bullet for sure.
Oh, that was a really incredible conversation. I'm so glad that we got to chat about this. You said something, you spoke to like 100 people, and I think it was around this question of like often scientific research or innovative solutions kind of come out of a lab, and then you go to market and say, here's what we built. What do you think? You kind of did something very differently, and I think that was part of a program that you're in. But just, I think that take was really refreshing to hear how you approached it. So how did you do it, and what did you do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we essentially went, like, again, I had the idea, spraying fresh produce to extend shelf life. I went to District 3. They took me on into this program called the Business Model Validation Program. Essentially, it's built on two main pillars, if you will. The first pillar is based on Steve Blank, who's out of Silicon Valley. He's very well known. He wrote a book called The Customer Discovery Process, and essentially it's going out and talking to people before you start developing anything, right? So the idea is make sure that you have a product market fit before you spend all this time and energy and money developing something, right? So the first thing was based on interviews that you do with people, and there is a very specific way to do the interviews, so you don't bias the interviewer. Make sure you get actually an honest response. So I was always undercover. I would be like, hey, I'm just researching the seafood business. What do you think about And if they don't say food waste as one of their top 3 problems, then I would say that it's not a problem, right? So, and then if they say, oh yeah, waste is a problem, I'll be like, well, how are you currently solving it? I'm just, I don't say anything about the product or what my ideas are. I just let them, talk about it, and they tell me, well, currently these are the only ways we have, and then at the end I would propose. I'm like, well, what if there was a technology that did this, and then get their feedback on it. So talking to people, the other pillar of the program was called the business model canvas, right? Which is essentially a canvas that would lay out all the major things that you need to populate in order to know, how does who is your customer, which is one of the biggest questions. Who is buying this thing, which is something you asked me in the interview. Who is your customer? And I don't think a lot of people know the answer to that question. I think we think we know, but we don't really know until you go out there and you start asking people. And then knowing your customer, how does it fit within the entire business model canvas, which was a very interesting exercise to go through. So as a scientist, I was never exposed to any of that stuff, right? It was not taught to us. You're technical, you're working alone, you're doing all these experiments, you're publishing papers, you're talking in, conferences, but you're not taught, how do I take this thing to market? What is needed? And I'm very grateful, and I said it multiple times in the past, I'm grateful for what District 3 provided me with that structure to think about how to take a deep tech product, a deep technology to market.
If you're building in climate, packaging, logistics, or really anywhere innovation meets the real world, this episode was packed with lessons. From picking the right wedge to start, to turning market friction into product design, to building defensible IP, Mina's journey with Freshr shows how science, market validation, and mission can align without compromise. It's a reminder that solving big problems doesn't always mean building massive systems. Sometimes it's just about slowing down bacteria on a piece of film and letting that change everything downstream. Thanks for listening to The Capitalist Hippie. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a founder, investor, or operator who's thinking about how to build smarter, more sustainable businesses. We'll see you next week.